some of what you were just talking about, Ascension just finished for North America. The Guard has qualified into VCT next year. And, much to your point, it really looked like the Guard and M80 as well, who finished in second, were as good or better than a lot of the teams that were in VCT Americas this year. And, having that final, I think we all kind of expected those two teams to be in the final. It was a great final. And the Guard makes it in. So, what do you think about, their run? It was just pretty much things went as expected?
I think it went as expected in my eyes. Like, I wasn't sure how the Union would play it. When I first saw them play against M80, I was like, ooh, this is a scary team. Like, this is a really, really scary team. I'm not going to lie. Like, their mid-rounding and just their ability to adapt to the things that were happening in all of their games was very impressive. So I got a little skeptical, and I was very interested to watch the Guard play them, actually, when it hit bracket play. But once the Guard beat them, and like ran through the upper bracket, I had utmost faith in them to win the finals, just because the double veto advantage. And when a strategic team like the Guard gets that double veto advantage, you'll see stuff like this, right? It's the same thing as like Fnatic versus EG in Tokyo. Like, it's very, very hard to overcome something like that when the apparent better team, in addition to getting to ban their worst map, gets to ban potentially your best map. All of a sudden, like, now we're looking at a very different series. Like, we're looking at you don't even know what they're going to ban. So, like, you can't even prep. Meanwhile, they know exactly how the maps are going to go, and they know exactly what to prep, and they get 2 bans. Like, so it's very hard to come from the lower bracket and win. I'm not saying it can't be done, and it will never be done. I think it actually has been done in the past. But at this point in Valorant, it becomes harder and harder as the teams get better and better, I think, especially because we're in the first year of franchising, or the partner league, and there hasn't been a ton of time to develop a 7-map pool. And quite frankly, I don't know if there'll ever be enough time to get like perfect on it, just because the metas are always changing in Valorant. It's not like Counter-Strike, right? In Counter-Strike, the game was very consistent, and so teams could develop a 7-map pool and just kind of like stick to it. And in Valorant, I think it's difficult. And
even then, it's really hard.
Yeah.
In CS.
Yeah, it's very hard. It's very hard. So, like, even a team like Fnatic was just insta-banning Pearl, like all Tokyo, and they were fine with that, and they won, and they looked incredible, right? Like, no one talks about the fact that they could only play 6 maps because they never had to play the 7th. And EG was banning Bind the whole time up until the finals, where we saw like that weird ass Reina Chamber comp, like, and like, teams, it's hard. It's very, very hard to play all 7 maps because there's only a finite amount of practice. And if you practice that shit map too much, your best map is going to suffer. And you can't risk that. You just can't risk that, especially when you know the tournament is going to operate in best of 3s, and you'll always be able to ban your worst map. It's like, what is the point? What is the point? So when the Guard got to the finals, I was very confident they would win. And I think they are such a good team. Like, there was no way I would be sad if either M80 or the Guard won this event. I think I'm super proud that they came from our region, to be honest. Like, they should be proud of themselves. Like, they're honestly, the level of play between them is insane. But I will say that I know people are like kind of pissed because they saw this excuse, but I even said it before the tournament started, that they had the benefit of being in the region with VCT Americas. And that is a huge benefit. The fact that they get to scrim against all these teams on the regular and learn from them and see what's happening in VCT Americas behind the scenes. Not the stuff you see in the matches, but like what comps they're testing and like how they're working, or the paces that these teams move from the other regions and stuff. And that's a huge benefit to have. But then at the same token, you have like the Union got to play in the studio that they literally played in the whole time. So I don't know. There's benefits for each side, truthfully.
Now, I saw you gave some interesting thoughts on the construction of the Guard roster to begin with. You kind of echoed how I traditionally had thought about at least the early Valorant rosters, where like the old 100 Thieves roster, the combination of some Zoomers, and some boomers was the most optimal way of taking a team. You have a bunch of cracked young up and coming players that maybe they played a little bit of CS, but Valorant is their main game. And then you have a bunch of tactical minds that have a lot of experience from Counter-Strike and they know how to play in a structured way. And they've been on stage before, high pressure situations. And that was the best way of, constructing a team. But then the Guard, with NCE as the coach, has kind of taken a vastly different way of approaching the situation and has been very successful. And you were kind of saying that it changed your mind on how you thought about how teams should be put together. Do you think that's
Yeah.
true?
No, that's 100% true. Like I don't take that back at all. Actually, I think what I saw the Guard do before I built 100 Thieves, with like Dan and Mike back then, completely changed my thought process on what can work in Valorant. Because like you, I thought it would have to be built similar to what that original 100 Thieves kind of looked like. Not the original, but the first successful one. With like Nitro, Ethan, Hiko, and they were able to play with like Dicey and Asana, Dicey and Asana, and and then Steel was in there as well. But they always had like the two youngsters, right? And I was like, oh, this is like, you need that cracked duelist, like the zoomy duelist to go around, and you can have another zoomy with insane mechanics too, but you're gonna need a lot of experience in like the mid round and stuff like that. But then I saw what the Guard did, and I would watch their games and how decisions were taken away from the players, which sounds like like I'm saying something bad, but it's not at all. And I was like, oh, you can actually just, and this goes back to the first thing we talked about, like you can win in Valorant by just, it's not about who makes the least mistakes. It's about who can overpower the other team or do something unexpected that the other team can't react to appropriately. So when I watched the Guard do that, particularly like with MCE coaching before Josh came in, I definitely took that into account when we built, 100 Thieves. And it was part of the reason why I was comfortable letting Ethan go when we built 100 Thieves, and letting Hiko go when we built 100 Thieves, and bringing in all of these like somewhat inexperienced players to come along. Asana, right? Like Bang, Derek only played a little bit in Rise. Stellar was like coming up from like tier 2. It's like we didn't really bring in any big names, and it was definitely a risky play. Like, I'm not gonna lie, it was definitely a risk because I didn't know if like the Guard players inherently had something in them, but it showed me during my time in 100 Thieves that you can take a lot of decision making away from inexperienced players in Valorant. You can tell them what to do and they'll do that, and then over time you can kind of crack open the box and start giving more freedoms. And that's what I think the way Josh came into the Guard is he had a very big set of shoes to fill, if I'm being honest. Like, I talked to him around the Ludwig Tarek Invitational, which they won, and he had such a good approach. He was like, yeah, these guys are like really buttoned up, they're very strategic. I'm going to teach them how to mid round. Like, we've been working a lot on like post plants and mid rounding, and that's what he knows as like an ex-CS IGL that I would play against all the time. And I look at them now and they're willing to play the scrappy game, and then they have that strategic style now, and it's like they've like blossomed into this amazing team. Like, I love watching the Guard. I love it. And I think like that's kind of like what 100 Thieves I was trying to do with them, right? Like, that's part of the reason why, like, when you listen to some of the Stellar interviews, he says like I was too rigid, I was too structured. It's because I had to be that way. Like, as you can ask any of my teammates like that I played with in the past in CS, like, I wasn't super rigid. I was strict in the fact that like when things needed to be done, I would make sure those things were done, but I wasn't opposed to the idea of playing a loose round or two. And I definitely trusted my players a lot back in those days. And I think in Valorant, it's going back to the China thing. Like, that's why I know that region is going to be insane. Is like because of projects like the Guard and 100 Thieves. Like, you don't need super experienced players. You just need someone to tell them what to do that knows what to do.
Yeah, M80 as well, I think, is very similar in terms of structure to the Guard. A lot of up-and-coming young players that found a really cohesive way of playing together. They all like to play with each other. And, they found a really good unit. Unfortunately for the Guard, their organization might not exist by the time that VCT America starts next year, as it was reported earlier in the year. Stan Kroenke, who owns the Guard and the LA Guardians, the Overwatch League team, and the Call of Duty team. He owns the Nuggets and the Rams and the Colorado Avalanche and the Arsenal FC. He's reportedly wants to exit all of his esports stuff. But as of now, they still have a really good org backing them. Maybe the free money that Riot gives them will entice, Kroenke and his son to keep the organization by next year. But if not, there will be a huge opportunity for another organization to come in and to pick up this roster, who's automatically going to be
Yeah.
the VCT slot.
Yeah, I really hope they stay together. I mean, like I think it would be it would shock me if they didn't, because they they stuck together at the start of the partner league, despite getting individual offers to like get plucked, right? And it was such like, it's exactly what I was trying to do with 100 Thieves with our like boot camps and stuff. Like, I hated spending all that time in Texas, but I knew if we all did it together, we're like, it's like trial by fire. Like at that point, it's like you're gone in it together, and you're like, you're so tight. You're like family, right? And that's what the Guard has, right? Like last year they spent like 4-month time frames in Texas together boot camping. Like that's how they got here. It wasn't just that they were good on the internet and like they just played a lot of ranked and like this and that. Like, no, these guys really grinded together, and they put a lot of time in outside of even like playing the game, like just talking about the game and talking about how they're going to react and stuff like that. And I think it's great that you drew the comparison to M80 too, because they had Kaplan, who's now the coach of Sentinels, who's very strategic. And then they went to Happy, who comes from CS. Like he's an IGL from CS like me, who's probably a little bit more loose, right? And I think that benefit showed for M80 a lot this year. Like they are very similar teams, actually, now that you mention it.
I mean, ironically, a lot of the success that we thought that would be the ex Counter-Strike player transitioning into the new Valorant roster and kind of being like the old head on the team, much more of it has come from being the head coach. We have Fraud over there, who's, running Loud. We have Happy over here for M80. There's Counter-Strike coaches all around some of the most successful Valorant teams right now. And I think that's a lot where we see much more of the experience come in, more necessarily than inside the game as maybe the IGL or one of the players. And I think we'll continue to see a lot of the ex-CS players kind of transition to more of a head coaching role as they get older. But between the team, I don't think we're going to see any changes with the Guard. I think M80, obviously, because they did not qualify, there's much more of a chance that those players will get poached by some of the VCT teams. All the teams that do not qualify for Worlds this year are going to be making immediate changes, which we'll be talking about in a little bit. And I think, of course, the players in M80 are going to be some of the first choices that these teams are going to want to go to for replacements. But I have been told from a source that they do want to stay together. So I actually think that there is a very likely chance that these guys all stick together and do not take an option going into the partner teams. It would be a huge risk. They would be losing a big payday because they would be getting into some of the biggest organizations, and they would be losing a big opportunity to play on the main stage. But I think they have found such a good unity between all of them. They have such a good rapport with each other. It seems like they really are friends with each other. They're not just teammates. They really are friends, that they are willing to run it back one more time to see if they can get in.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I feel terrible for them because they were like the best team in challenges by a long shot, right? Throughout the entire year. And they got right up to the finish line and fell short just barely, right? Just barely. And yeah, I mean, you mentioned that like they'll probably run it back. And truthfully, like, I don't know, maybe like one or two of them.
Should? Like,
I mean, what else? What are the options?
If you were advising those guys,
what are the options for them? They have no options. That's what I'm saying.
Look, as we will talk about in a little while, there is a very high chance that Cloud9, Sentinels, and 100 Thieves are all going to make huge roster changes at the end of this season, and there will be spots open on these teams. And that I can definitely see players like, especially Nismo and Qualanoob, and even Xander. I think his stock as an IGL has gone way up. They have a huge opportunity to get onto these teams. If you were advising the players themselves, do you think they should run it back, or should they be looking after themselves if they have an opportunity to go onto a partner team?
That's a pretty hard question, because I think like one or two of them could get plucked, because they are all like, their team could definitely compete in VCT Americas. But what people don't, I mean, people love to make blanket statements like that and don't really look into it. There's 5 American teams, or 5 North American teams in franchising, 6 now if you include the Guard. But the Guard's probably not picking any of them up. So that leaves 5 teams. That's 25 slots. Now, I already know like 2 of those teams aren't going to make changes. So there's like 15 maybe. And then you start looking at like who plays the controller role for every team. And like, are you replacing Sam in the controller role from NRG? No, not really, probably. Bang is like such a great up and coming talent. So like, are you replacing him? And it's like, you just go through the list like that, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, this is a very tricky situation. And while I do think that any one of them could get poached, like I don't know if any of them will, like that's how little slots are available. It's like, it's a complex issue that has like a lot of moving parts depending on how teams play in like LCQ and Champions. And honestly, if like players want to play next year, like truthfully, like that matters too.
Well, I have heard they want to stick together, but I guess we'll have to see in a couple weeks, as teams don't qualify for Worlds. Maybe organizations will make changes even really early before the offseason starts. And maybe there will be opportunities. I know they're definitely going to get some offers, and they will be they'll have like, they're going to have to think about it. Some of those players on the team are definitely going to have to think about it. The only other thing I'll say about Ascension is Riot must be on their knees thanking the gods that the Union did not qualify for VCT. There is a world where this team, who has a bunch of highly questionable players who have done highly questionable things, from soliciting minors to sexual harassment, and then shit-talking everyone on the stage, could have qualified directly into VCT next year. And Riot must just be thanking M80 and The Guard so much for putting them in their place.
I agree.